So, hey guys, today we're going to do a little bit of clarification on the optimal and not optimal plays video. So, we're doing a little bit of a follow up for that today. But yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Improvement Week is indeed over. So, well, every single action you take is probably going to be a misplay to some extent. It can be something very simple. So if we just do like a test hand here, uh, right now, this hand, I guess there's probably a better deck. Let me swap decks real quick. Let's do DD, I guess, instead. So with DD, let's find a test hand. So that's not a good hand here. And also, I think this list is outdated, but let's find a little bit better of a hand. Looking for some type of hand. All right. So here, there's a lot of options we have. We can start off with activating Swirl Slime. We can start off with normal summon Copernicus. We can do 1-for-1 to start, and all of these accomplish different things. So, for example, we could start with Swirl Slime, and we could use this to make the Flame King Genghis. We could also make Flame High King Genghis, and then we also have the option of Swirl Slime to bring back the Copernicus, or we can bring back the Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok, or special summon it from hand, I mean. But we could also technically bring them back from the graveyard with either the Flame High King or Flame King Genghis, and we can also make Baron by normal summoning Orthros and special summoning Genghis with the Swirl Slime. And we can also start with 1-for-1 to put technically Swirl Slime, Copernicus, or Ragnarok probably. I think we'd probably want to hold on to Orthros personally. I don't think there's a world where we want to send Orthros, but technically there might be one where this is somehow the optimal play depending on exactly what our opponent has. And that's just with this hand, right? And at first, if we look at just the options we have a lot that we can do here. And some things could change if, for example, I also resolve Griffin's effective mulligan, kinda, and we do a draw. So in this case, it would be Swirl Slime, so it would arguably be optimal to not do the draw, but you don't know what the top deck will be. So I would probably not go for the draw here because my hand is pretty damn good for comboing. So I personally would not with these 5 in hand. But if you did, it would be a misplay on so many levels here. But it could have technically could have been a payoff if we had infinite impermanence being drawn, I guess, or Ash Blossom Joe Spring. Either of those would be fairly good. I think Ash Blossom being the best thing we could possibly top deck here because I think our back row is going to be just good enough. We're going to be able to search Headhunt, and then we'll be able to also have a copy of Contract with the Swamp King and Dark Contract with the Gate, so that would be extra triggers for our Deus Machinax here. But just in general, there are a lot of things that can be misplays that are not extremely noticeable. So for example, depending on exactly what my opponent has, the card I start with could be a misplay. Like if I start with 1-for-1, this could be a misplay. If I start with Swirl Slime, this could also be a misplay, or it could be the right play, depending on exactly what my opponent has and what my opponent does. So if my opponent has, like, let's say Ash Blossom Joe Spring, and I could play around it, then 1-for-1 would be a mistake here, because we don't have any searches that we actually need to perform. So let's assume my opponent in this case has Ash Blossom Joe Spring, but no Nibiru. Then the correct sequencing, if I want to use the Baron for this, I could go Swirl Slime effect to make Flame King Genghis, and then we'll send, I guess, like, in this case, Copernicus would be okay, or we could do Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok. In fact, we might not even use 1-for-1, but well, normal summon Orthros, make Baron. Baron can negate the Ash Blossom or an Imperm, so that's pretty good play. And the special summon in this case, We probably won't use Swirl Slime's effect to special summon for a while. I don't think. Will we? Yeah, I don't think so. And then we probably do 1-for-1, pitching the Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok, so we won't be using Swirl Slime's effect on the current turn to special summon anyone from hand. And the idea here is that we can still special summon this Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok later on in the turn with either Flame High King Genghis can special summon Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok, or we can use the Pend effect to special summon it, or we can use like Flame King Genghis. Any of those work, and we'll make presumably Gilgamesh. We can search with the Dark Contract with the Gate as well. So in this case, I think the search we want to do is maybe Lamia. If we don't find an opportunity to send it to the graveyard, we could consider searching it instead. And then we can pitch Lamia with 1-for-1 as well. So we have the idea of add Lamia with Dark Contract with the Gate that we search off of the Wave King Caesar, and then 1-for-1. To special summon Kepler, and then pitching the Lamia. That's technically an idea as well. And then we can Lamia Graveyard effect to make using Oracle King Dark plus Lamia to make Curse King Siegfried. So there's that idea, and there's also like potentially the idea of I guess pendulum summoning. Like you wouldn't do this in this hand, but we could pendulum summon a Copernicus or Griffin, depending on how it goes, right? So we have the scales of, well, I'm getting lost in the sauce. We have scales with Orthros and Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok, so we could just scale like Copernicus, Orthros, and then have Orthros effect popping Copernicus plus Orthros to then pen summon them, which is kind of gnarly. I mean, there are times when this line unironically does come up, but it's not that often, I would say. But there are some hands where you might want to do it. But that's me getting really lost in the sauce here. So yeah, in general, the important thing is to just, instead of like figuring out like what the optimal play might be, because you probably won't be able to, because it takes like guesswork, and at this point we're just playing percentages. It's like, okay, our opponent has a 30% chance of this, so if we play around Ash Blossom, we probably don't need to, but we can with this hand. But the downside, of course, is that if we play around the Ash Blossom, then our end board is weaker, and if our end board is weaker, we'll lose if our opponent did not in fact have Ash Blossom Joe Spring, because then they would probably have Engine instead and be able to brute force our through our end board, because it's a little bit weaker because I played around Ash Blossom Joe Spring or something like that. So there are downsides like that as well, where because you're hard reading something, it's a misplay because they don't have that thing, right? So the best thing is to just look for, instead of the optimal play with information you don't have, we just go for the optimal plays with information we do have. Like, maybe my opponent has a trigger only when I do a specific action, so it is very likely they have Ash Blossom Joe Spring. Or maybe they have a response only when I perform a special summon, and not just any summon, because on my normal summon they had no response, so it's not an imperm. So they might have a Ghost Mourner, for example, or when I activate things that move from the graveyard, there's a trigger, except when I did the effect to place from the graveyard. So I believe it is a Ghost Spell my opponent has, for example. So that kind of thing is pretty reasonable to start doing guesswork on, and kind of figuring out what triggers when and using that to your advantage. That I think is a lot more reasonable. And not, well, you guys shouldn't worry too much about if you're misplaying or not, because the answer, like most of the time, straight up is yes, you're misplaying in some way, shape, or form, because you're not doing the highest level, most optimal play possible, and that applies to most players. It could be something small, like this sequencing is better in this situation. Like, uh, if I activated card A instead of card B, or card C instead of card B, it would be better, right? For whatever reason, and it plays around a thing my opponent had, but there was no way for you to know they had that thing because the sequence you did plays around something else entirely, which your opponent just did not happen to have this time, but maybe the thing you're playing around is more common, right? So it makes more sense to do. And sometimes, I guess, playing around things is just something you should always do. So let's say, for example, you're playing Labyrinth. If I activate, well, if I am in standby phase, I probably will chain Welcome immediately. Well, not chain. I will activate Labyrinth, well, Welcome Labyrinth, and then I will just let it resolve as chain link 1, and I would not chain like Big Welcome to it. And this just plays around giving my opponent 2 max E draws. So if I do this now and my opponent chains max E, I'll just chain Big Welcome and they'll just get the Welcome Labyrinth draw. If we were to chain both and my opponent were to wait, they get 2 draws. But if we were to do these in 2 separate chains, they only get 1 draw maximum. So that's just a slightly better way to kind of play this hand, and that's how you would do it, I guess. And then let's see, because everything you do is a misplay, technically it's also a learning experience, and you can just, well, you should just be a little bit aware of when you make a big misplay. So if there was a play that you should have done and you had the information to know that was the correct play, that's the kind of misplay you want to be catching. If we're thinking on the terms of like, oh, my opponent's next card, if their next card after like doing the max C draw was something relevant, there was no way for me to know that the correct play was to literally activate nothing and just pass turn and then OTK on turn 2. There's no way for you to really know that, right? So let's say my opponent's next card in hand is like, I don't know, or not next card. Their top 2 cards are like Cyframe Driver, and then the card immediately after Cyframe Driver is a starter. Like, let's say, I don't know, Diabell Star. It doesn't really matter what it is, but it's a 1-card starter, or it unbricks their hand and really gets our opponent going, right? So if that were the case, then the situation where our opponent has maybe, I don't know, like something like a maxi, and they, because we give them the 1 draw off of maxi, they can get to the card after Driver, which is the starter. There's no reason for us to honestly pass and do absolutely nothing most of the time, because first off, we don't know any of the 5 cards in our opponent's hand, nor do we know their next 2 draws, right? Normally. But if we kind of use hindsight bias, yeah, I guess because our opponent had Gamma, they would have been forced to make a minimalistic, not so good play, and then we could have dropped like maybe an Imperm from hand, which has very little counterplay for the hand our opponent has in this case. And then they just have to pass, and then we can easily OTK our opponent next turn, even if they were to have a maxi here and we have no like Called By or Ash, because their Gamma is not activatable because they normal summoned a guy. So all of this is just really unreasonable to think about, but everything you can play around, you just should be a little bit aware. Like, for example, not as relevant with Gamma at 1, but if my opponent, well, if I am on like Shifter and my opponent could be on Gamma and I can play around it, there are a lot of reasons to do so. The only reason that to not play around Gamma is if I'm worried if my opponent is playing like Snake Eye, and specifically they open Diabell Star, because Diabell Star sends for cost. I would have to activate Shifter B4, but does it even matter if they special summon Diabell Star? Because Diabell Star searches typically original sinful spoils, which can activate, right? But I guess the thing we're really worried about is if my opponent opened also one of these level 3 Ghost Girl hand traps. So maybe they do normal summon Actual Summon Joyous Spring with their special summon Diabell Star to make Baron, which for whatever reason I can't play around. So in that case, if we were worried about that, we would have to Shifter, right? Before Diabell Star is able to be special summoned, so before main phase. But this plays into like Gamma, which then worst case scenario with Gamma, I guess, is that you get hit by Omega afterwards. So if Shifter just gets dropped out of our hand for free, our opponent special summons Gamma, so it trades 1-for-1 at that point, and then Gamma make Omega, and then we start the next turn with let's see, that would be 4 cards in hand, which is pretty rough, versus a full end board, and we drop 0 interruptions onto our opponent. So we're going to assume that is the case, and we get railed, and our opponent gets to, you know, just go off with their remaining 4 cards, I guess, in hand as well. So Gamma Punish can be very real and very rough, but you can technically play around Gamma as well. And there are other decks where like playing around Gamma is a lot more reasonable to do, like maybe Super Heavy Samurai is fine, right? Because well, they just completely can't play or do anything aside from maybe make Baguska pass under Shifter, and that's about it. But it's not guaranteed that you'll be able to do so either. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and hopefully you guys don't worry about misplaying too much, because you know everything's just a misplay. Just do your best, really. That's the best you can do, is just to try your best, right? To just try to think ahead a little bit, and yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.